When people complain about movie tropes, what they're really saying is, I've seen this before, and I think that's the wrong way to judge a story, because that argument didn't start with movies, didn't start with television, and it definitely didn't start with YouTube film essays. It goes all the way back to the very beginning of storytelling, long before anyone was arguing online about originality. Storytellers already understood that stories repeat, and that repetition isn't a flaw, it's the foundation. Because when a trope actually works, it doesn't feel recycled, it feels inevitable. I was having fun last week filming for another YouTube channel I produce when I thought about the idea of tropes. This clip right here.
3, 2, 1.
If you go all the way back to Aristotle, he breaks storytelling down into structure in Poetics. He argues that stories are imitations of human action, and that what matters most isn't novelty, but cause and effect. Characters making decisions and living with the consequences. Aristotle wasn't obsessed with surprise, he was obsessed with the meaning. He believed a story works when events unfold because of who the character is, not because the plot needs a twist. In other words, the shape of the story can be familiar. What matters is why things happen. Now, let's look at William Shakespeare, who reused storylines constantly. Forbidden love, power-hungry men destroying themselves, mistaken identity, whole plays built on it. The director James Cameron has said in multiple interviews that he had to convince Leonardo DiCaprio to be in Titanic. Why? Because Leo had just done the original Titanic, Romeo and Juliet. He convinced him because they weren't the same though. They feel completely different because they're about different stages of life, different values, and different emotional truths. Shakespeare didn't avoid repetition, he embraced it because he understood that originality comes from perspective, not plot. That's why this idea that there are only 7 stories or 12, depending on who you ask, isn't an insult. It's actually a relief. It means the job of a storyteller isn't to invent a brand new shape that's never existed before. The job is to take a familiar shape and fill it with something honest, something specific, something human. Tropes aren't shortcuts. They're a shared language. They tell the audience, you know how to walk, but let's give you a different terrain. And once you realize that, you start noticing that some of the most beloved movies ever are built entirely on obvious tropes. For example, Star Wars, The Matrix, and the story of Jesus are the same story, the chosen one. These movies and religions don't work because they avoided tropes. They work because the filmmakers understood exactly what the trope meant and then used it to reveal character, theme, emotion, and the promise of living forever. Tropes don't make stories lazy. Using them without intention does. Today, I'm going to show you 3 tropes that maybe you didn't even realize were tropes because of how well they were used. The first one, the one last job trope.
And this job, this last job, that's how I get there. I would not be standing here if I knew any other way.
The one last job trope might be one of the most recognizable setups in movies. You've seen it everywhere. Heat is built around it, Logan is a variation of it, The Town, Ronin, Unforgiven, even Ocean's 11, all versions of someone who's done this life, doesn't want to do it anymore, but gets pulled back in for one final score. And this is usually where people roll their eyes because the setup feels obvious.
Hey, Mr. Cobb, how would you like to go home?
You already know what the pitch is. Do this job, everything will be fine until it isn't. On the surface, it feels mechanical, like the story is just flipping a switch to get the plot moving. The reason this trope so often feels lazy is because it's familiar. It's because it's usually external. The motivation is money or pressure or a threat. Something bad will happen if the character doesn't take the job. That means the job itself is doing all of the work. The character isn't changing, they're just reacting. And when that happens, the trope feels like a shortcut instead of a story. What Inception does so well is that it completely shifts what one last job actually means. Yes, on paper, it's still the same setup. Cobb is a criminal. He's tired. He wants out. He's promised freedom if he pulls off one final impossible task, but the job isn't really about the heist, it's about guilt. Cobb doesn't accept the job because of the money or the challenge. He accepts it because he believes it's the only way he'll ever see his kids again. The external goal is freedom, but the internal goal is forgiveness from himself. That's the difference. Nolan uses the trope as a doorway into character, not a crutch for plot. Every layer of the dream isn't just escalating stakes, it's forcing Cobb to confront the emotional baggage he's been bearing. The deeper the job goes, the more personal it becomes. By the time we reach the final act, the question isn't, will they pull off the job? It's, will Cobb finally let go? And that's why the trope doesn't feel tired. The structure is familiar, but the emotional engine is doing something specific and intentional. So Inception doesn't work in spite of being a one last job movie. It works because Nolan understood exactly why the trope exists in the first place. It's not about the job, it's about the thing the character can't walk away from until they face it head on. And when a trope is used that way, it stops feeling like a cliche and starts feeling inevitable. The walking away from an explosion trope is one of those action movie images that everybody recognizes instantly. It's in Terminator 2, it's in Man on Fire, it's in Bad Boys, it's in The Rock. The character turns their back, keeps walking, and the explosion behind them is basically the movie saying, this person is ice cold. And I get why people roll their eyes at it, because a lot of times it's just a visual flex. It's not about the character. It's not about the story. It's just a cool poster moment shoved into the movie because it looks cool. But then Nolan takes that exact same idea in The Dark Knight, Joker walking away from the hospital, and instead of playing it like a tough guy mic drop, he turns it into something weirdly human and unpredictable. The hospital is supposed to blow. Joker's walking away in this nurse outfit, doing his little casual stroll. He clicks the detonator. Nothing happens. So the movie gives you this tiny moment of awkward reality where the perfect trope moment fails. And Joker doesn't suddenly turn into the supervillain we expect. He turns into the human we didn't expect. He gets annoyed. He starts clicking it again. He's fumbling with it. And when it finally goes off, it's not just an explosion behind a cool guy. It's chaos. The thing he's an agent of, catching up to him in real time. And that's why it works. Because the trope isn't being used to tell you Joker is bad. It's being used to tell you Joker is dangerous in a way that feels unsettling and specific. Because when it does go off, he just accepts it for what it is. Chaos. That's what makes him feel more real, and somehow that makes him scarier. The movie takes a cliche action image and injects it with personality. And now you're not watching a trope, you're watching a character. So again, same ingredients, same familiar walk away from the explosion setup, but it lands differently because the moment has meaning and character inside it. The explosion isn't the point. The point is what happens when the perfect cinematic moment glitches for just a second and we get this tiny peek at Joker's mindset before the whole thing erupts. One of the most emotionally cruel romantic tropes is the moment where someone finally shows up at the door of the person they love just to realize they're too late. The door opens and the person they came for is already with someone else. You see versions of this in movies like My Best Friend's Wedding, Closer, Blue Valentine, even La La Land. The trope is built on timing. The idea that love doesn't wait and hesitation has consequences. It usually does exactly one thing. It confirms the character's worst fear. What's interesting is how often this trope relies on assumption. The audience is trained to read the signs immediately. Voices inside, laughter, movement, and jump straight to the conclusion. And most movies reward that instinct. The pain is clean, it's quick, it's final. You showed up too late in a story. What The Holiday does differently is layer that moment with emotional context before it ever happens. Cameron Diaz's character is coming off of breakup. She's been cheated on, she's been lied to. This is why she's on The Holiday. She's emotionally raw, guarded, and already primed to expect betrayal. On top of that, her job is literally editing movie trailers. Her entire career is built around taking fragments of information and cutting them into emotional narratives. She's trained to fill in the gaps to assume story before they're confirmed. So when Jude Law's character takes mysterious phone calls, and seems evasive, her brain does what it always does. It cuts a trailer in her head. That's what makes the doorstep moment hit so hard. When she shows up unannounced and hears voices inside, the movie isn't just using a trope. It's letting us experience the exact story she's already told herself. The assumption that he's with another woman feels inevitable, not because the movie is being manipulative, but because her emotional history and professional instincts have trained her to believe it. The trope isn't happening to her, it's happening inside her. And then the reveal quietly dismantles everything. The voices aren't other women. There are, but they're his daughters. The secrecy wasn't deception, it was protection for him. He's not a playboy, he's a widower. In one moment, the trope flips from heartbreak to vulnerability. The pain wasn't that she arrived too late, it was that she almost walked away believing a story that just wasn't true. The movie turns a familiar romantic cliche into a character study about trust, projection, and emotional survival. That's why this version of the trope works so well. The structure is the same. Show up at the door, expect the worst, but the meaning is completely different. The moment isn't about punishment or bad timing. It's about how past wounds and learned storytelling patterns shape how we interpret the present. The trope becomes a mirror, not a shortcut. And once again, it proves the point. It's never about the trope itself. It's about how much humanity you're willing to pack inside it. So when people say they're tired of movie tropes, I don't think they're actually tired of the stories. I think they're tired of the stories that don't understand why those moments exist in the first place. Because the examples we talked about today all use familiar setups. The one last job, the explosion walk-off, showing up at the door, and none of them work because they're new. These tropes work because they're intentional. Each one takes a moment we recognize and uses it to reveal something specific about a character. That's exactly what Aristotle was getting at when he talked about cause and effect. And it's what Shakespeare proved by telling the same kinds of stories over and over and over again. The structure stays the same, but the meaning changes, depending on who the character is, what they're carrying, and what the moment costs them emotionally. The familiarity isn't a weakness, it's the entry point. It lets the audience lean in instead of trying to catch up. Originality isn't about avoiding repetition. There's only 12 stories. Originality has to come from within them. It has to come from honesty, knowing why a moment exists and what it's meant to say about the people inside it. When a trope is used with intention, it stops feeling like a cliche and starts feeling inevitable.